Hello there! Welcome back to Tranquility du Jour, episode 494. I'm your host, Kimberly Wilson, bringing you tranquility since 2005. Today, I'm talking with therapist April Snow about being an HSP, which is a highly sensitive person, navigating overwhelm and the negativity bias, and why acceptance is the perfect place to start. Considering everything that's going on in the world right now, I thought this would be a really important podcast to feature at this moment because I'll bet a lot of our listeners are also HSPs or would identify, at least to some degree, in that realm. And the good news is I've got a link to the HSP test in the show notes, which can be found at kimberlywilson.com/494. So you can determine if this is you. Also, and if not, I'll bet you have some HSPs in your life. So either way, I think you're going to find this podcast quite insightful. Now, before we hear from April, I wanted to mention a few things that are upcoming, two, actually. One is happening July 11th, which is our TDJ Brunch with a side of tranquility. Learn ways to find doses of tranquility in your everyday. Plus, we're going to be talking signature style tips, and I'm going to have a few guests joining me. So that is Saturday, July 11th from noon to 1. It's a free event. And then the next one I'm offering is a mid-year virtual retreat, and that's happening on Saturday, July 18th, the following weekend, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So basically, during this virtual retreat, we'll have our typical components, right, of creativity, mindfulness, journaling, yoga. But the idea is to spend a day reviewing your year and dreaming up what remains. Because I think we can all agree 2020 has been somewhat unprecedented. And I hate to use that word because it's so overused, but it's also so accurate. And so my hope is this will be a great kind of reset button and to begin looking ahead about what is to come. And there is a link to both of these events in the show notes. So again, I'm so excited to share this episode with you. So let's jump in. April Snow is a licensed psychotherapist in California who specializes in working with highly sensitive introverts. April strongly believes that being an HSP doesn't have to stop you from living a fully engaged life and is on a mission to help HSPs create a life on their own terms so they can manage the overwhelm and start to thrive. Find out more at expansiveheart.com. Welcome, April.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'm so happy to be here.
It's a treat to have you on the show. You know, I must have found out about you probably about 6 months ago, and I followed ever since. And I'm just delighted to find a therapist who focuses on, HSPs. And we'll get into that, listeners, as to what that is. So it's a delight to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm always excited to connect with another highly sensitive therapist and to dive in to sharing more about the trait with people that haven't heard about it before.
Now, tell me, for you, how did your journey to creating a practice for, around HSPs, like how did this come about and how did you decide or figure out you were an HSP?
Yeah, it's actually, the process is pretty similar. So I've been working with HSPs specifically throughout my whole practice. While I was in grad school, I was doing some research on introversion and attachment, just really trying to understand myself more, why I felt different, why I seemed to take a different approach in the world. And with introversion, it just wasn't quite telling the whole story. So I was out to lunch with a classmate, and she said to me, "Have you ever heard of Dr. Elaine Aron's work?" And I said, "No, I don't know who that is." And she said, "Well, she's the researcher, the main researcher on the trait of high sensitivity." And so I went and I started reading all the books and just really devouring as much information as I could find. And it's like a light switch went off. I always say this because it really was illuminating. It changed my whole life. And this was before I started seeing clients, and I knew right away just how impactful this was for me and what a life changer it was having this information about myself, I had to do that work in my practice. And I had a really supportive supervisor when I was first starting out that said, go for it. If you know this is what you want to do, start focusing on that from the beginning. And now I have a full practice of all HSPs. That's the primary source of my work. And I also work with highly sensitive therapists as well, doing retreats and run an online community. So yeah, I always like to say, like, I live, breathe, and sleep HSPs. It's my whole life at this point.
I love this because it is so specialized. And listeners, we're going to define HSPs in a moment. And I actually have the book in front of me, so I'll go over some of the self-test pieces. But what I think is really interesting too about what you just said, April, is that you recognize like people weren't processing the way you were processing as an HSP. Can you give us a little more insight into that, especially with the introversion not quite being the full picture?
Right, exactly. Even Dr. Elaine Aron herself thought when she was first starting to research, she thought it was introversion, just thought she would be diving into that a little bit more, and soon realized, oh yeah, 30% of HSPs are actually extroverts. So just to give a little background around, so being highly sensitive is a trait. So it's, you're born with some kind of more perceptive qualities in your brain and your nervous system. And so I can go into the core characteristics of that. I think that kind of helps flesh it out a bit. So it's characterized by the acronym DOES. So D is depth of processing. This means you're going to think deeply. You're going to take more time for transitions. Your brain is wired to pause and reflect before you act. So this is an evolutionary trait that was given. It gave our chances of survival more opportunity. So let's say you're the HSP and a few hundred years ago, you're the one hanging back, scanning the environment, looking for danger. You're noticing the little movement in the grass off in the distance, where the non-HSP is going to be more reactive. They're going to go in, they're going to be more action-oriented. They're not going to think before they act. They're going to take more risks. But we're hanging back, noticing. And as you can imagine, in our present-day world, noticing every little detail is very overwhelming. So we're deep processors, we're deep thinkers, and that can lead to the second characteristic, which is overwhelm or overstimulation. Our nervous systems get easily bombarded with all that we're taking in, and I like to call that the Achilles heel of the trait. It's the one characteristic that can be problematic for us. And then the next characteristic is E, so that stands for emotional responsiveness, empathy. We feel everything really deeply. So we do feel sadness and hardship really intensely, but we also feel the little joys. I always, I remember as a kid, I got excited over the littlest thing, and people didn't really quite understand, like, why are you so excited about this little, I don't know, this little trinket, but I just took everything in a big way. And that includes, spirituality, nature. A lot of HSPs are connected deeply to animals and art and music. Like, we're really moved by the world, which is such an advantage to be able to take everything in so intensely. And then the last characteristic is being more aware of subtleties. So a classic example of an HSP is we hate tags in our clothes, right? You've probably cut tags out of your shirt or been bothered by the seams on socks, little things like that, where we don't have sensory integration issues, but we are more aware of those little details like bright lights, loud noises. We also notice little details like you might be the first person to recognize that your friend got a haircut or they moved a plant in their office, something like that. So we're really taking everything in.
I love this. It's so nice to, I haven't read this book since I diagnosed myself as an HSP. Like, gosh, when did this book come out? Like 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, the 25th anniversary edition just came out. So
oh my gosh.
Years. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And what was funny is I remember whenever I read it and I took the quiz, I'm like, oh my God, like off the charts. I remember having gone into Target, which is like a favorite experience, but I remember walking in and being so overstimulated that I turned around and left. And it was like a 25-minute drive to get there. This is like 15 years ago. But that stands out vividly because yes, like bright lights. If I get my hair cut and when they wash it or they do color, I can't stand the pulling of my hair. it's so painful. Or I go to the dentist and I just have to let everyone know, like, I'm really sensitive. I'm like a big baby, and you just feel like a wussy. You have to take Advil before you get your hair
Same.
done, you
I
know?
know, because we're feeling all, there's a there's this great book. I think James Williams, his name is, but he talks about the child HSP's experience, and how a little child who's an HSP goes into a coffee shop. The HSP child is noticing the wood texture on the table. They're noticing, 10 different smells. They're hearing the people. They're seeing everything. Where the non-HSP child is just maybe taking in, a few different things. Like, oh yeah, there's some tables, there's some people, not even noticing. But we're taking in so many more layers. So no wonder we're getting overstimulated so easily. Going to Target,
Oh
like
my
on a
gosh.
Saturday, it's so
Oh,
much.
honey, no
Yeah.
way.
Right. Even though Target is fun, like going to Target,
Right.
but it can be too much sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so interesting. So, listeners, like, if this is aligning with you, you must pick up the book, The Highly Sensitive Person: How to Thrive When the World Overwhelms You. And I'll go through just a few pieces from the self-test, April, if that's okay, because I
Yeah,
think
I love
it's
that.
just
I think
like,
it really
oh.
helps take those characteristics and kind of flush them out into how they present in the world.
Yeah, and what's great about this too is, there's an online version, right? So people could
Yeah.
easily download and
Yep.
take this.
Yep. Go to hsperson.com. Yep. And it's right there.
Thank you. And listeners, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So, example, like, I tend to be very sensitive to pain. Hello, I just said that one. I find myself needing to withdraw during busy days into bed or a darkened room or any place where I can have some privacy and relief from stimulation. Particularly sensitive to the effects of caffeine, easily overwhelmed by things like bright lights, strong smells, coarse fabrics, tags in clothes, as you said, and sirens close by. I have a rich, complex inner life. I'm made uncomfortable by loud noises. This, I think, is really interesting that you also touched on, deeply moved by the arts or music. And you also mentioned animals, which, like, huge for me too. I get annoyed when people try to get me to do too many things at once. I try hard to avoid making mistakes or forgetting things. Avoid violence on TV or movies. Unpleasantly aroused when a lot is going on around me. Changes in my life shake me up. And I make it a high priority to arrange my life to avoid upsetting or overwhelming situations. Yes, 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 yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
We're living in a world that wasn't created necessarily by HSPs, so it can be a lot to take in. And something that that came up in the questionnaire is just how much we tend to be perfectionists. We want to please others. We want to do things perfectly. We want to make sure that we're not getting into an overstimulating place of being in conflict or hurting others, right? Because we feel so much empathy that it's so hard for us to disappoint someone or not take care of them in a sense. So yeah, it can be a lot to navigate as a HSP in this modern world.
It's so interesting you say that because, for 18 years, I had a yoga studio. And if there was an email that came through where someone was disappointed in anything, like anything, right? And we had a lot of classes, we had a lot of teachers, we had a large staff, any little thing, it was just like, I took it as a personal affront. Like, it was a representation of me, And so that takes a toll on somebody who's trying to be perfect.
Absolutely. Right. It's that one little piece of information that blocks everything else that you did well, or all the other students that were feeling engaged and supported by you. That one piece will just send us into a spiral.
And that's right, our negativity bias, right? Which you
Absolutely.
probably know of. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Seems strong though for HSPs a lot
Yes.
of the time.
Yes, yes. And negativity bias for listeners, for anyone who's like, what is that? It's just that, the fact that when we hear something negative, it's more like Velcro, and then positive is like Teflon is the way it's described. And it's just that we have a tendency to like kind of notice and look for what's wrong. And again, it's evolutionary because that's what allowed our ancestors to survive, by noticing like threats in the environment.
Right. And for HSPs, our job is to notice those dangers, and also our deeply processing brains access long-term memory more often. So just imagine, you've had an experience maybe where someone disappointed you, and then you think of all the other times someone disappointed you. So that feeling feels out of context, but it's because you're piecing things together to try to prepare yourself later to avoid that deep feeling or the danger or whatever it is. So it gets to be a lot to take in.
It is a lot. Now, you focus on HSP introverts, and how are they different than, like, I think you said 30% are extroverts?
Yeah, so for me, I'm an introvert, and so I love working with other introverts. So HSP introverts and extroverts are, they're pretty similar. They're going to experience all those, the characteristics and the things that we're talking about. Although the HSP extrovert, they're going to need more engagement in the external world, right? That's how extroverts get their dopamine, is by externally focusing. So they're going to need more social contact, maybe a little bit more novelty, more engagement. But they're still going to need that internal reflection time, right? Because our brains are taking so much in, we need to process, we need to download it, and extroverts are no exception to that. And they are going to get a little bit more easily overstimulated than the non-HSP extrovert. The non-HSP extrovert can go all day, go to the after party, have 5 social events in one day. The HSP extrovert's going to need a lot less of that, just a little taste. Whereas the HSP introvert is going to be very quiet, much more reserved or introspective, really like one-on-one time, do a lot of introspective work and reflection.
Yeah, I like that. I kind of like, I mean, who thought like, okay, I'm introvert, extrovert. Like, let's just start there. It's like, no, I'm introvert, extrovert. I could be an extroverted introvert, blah, 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 or an HSP introvert, or it's just like, oh
There's
my
so many
gosh.
layers. And
So many.
another piece that often comes in to consider, Dr. Aaron talks about this a lot, is being sensation seeking, right? Really being wired to seek out novelty and thrills. So I've worked with HSP introverts who are also sensation seeking, and that can be a hard set of characteristics to navigate because you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions internally, to go inward, to go outward, to experience, the world, but also to retreat back in. So yeah, there's all these different layers of ourselves. Because if you're an HSP, that's just one part of you, right? There's so many other intersections of your identity and your personality.
Now, when you start working with clients, how do you kind of help healing past wounds, embracing true self, begin to thrive again, especially, right now? So we're talking during a pandemic and during, the protests. And so, there's layer after layer of intensity. And so for you, kind of where do you start?
Yeah, right. Especially now there's so much going on in the world, and HSPs are feeling that so much, especially if they're an HSP of color. There's a whole nother layer of intensity. But for me, in my sessions, I always start with acceptance. In my virtual therapy office at this point, in that container, I tell my clients, this is a place where we get to try on being our true selves, playing by different rules. So I start with fully seeing them, accepting them, and helping them do that for themselves. Because I'm a big proponent, like my big motto is living a life on our own terms as sensitive people that aligns with our needs, because we're so often molding our lives to what others expect of us. And when we're doing that, that's a direct road to burnout, to feeling unfulfilled. And I've seen a lot of clients sink into a depression when they're stuck in that perfectionistic people pleasing space. And because we need meaning as HSPs, we need to do meaningful work, we need to have meaningful relationships, and that's essential for us. So I start there by helping clients accept themselves, so then that becomes the foundation, which then they can build a life that is in alignment for them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Acceptance is so big,
So
so
big,
big. Yeah.
so big. And I start with modeling that for them, and starting to pull out the strengths, right? Because as sensitive people, we're often told we're too much of this, we're not enough of this, and we internalize those messages, and they become our own, and we forget all the amazing parts about being sensitive. So I do my best to highlight those and to help my clients see, oh, look at look at these amazing gifts you have. Even if other people aren't quite getting it, they're definitely benefiting from your sensitivity. How much you notice, in your relationships, you're the one that's really reading body language, noticing when someone needs support. At work, you're coming up with innovative, creative ideas. You're really dedicated, passionate. In the world, you're, making change and seeing what needs attention. So there's just so many ways that we have gifts to give to the world.
Now, what advice would you have for helpers or even listeners who aren't in the helping profession that are feeling overwhelmed and burned out?
Yes, this is such a common experience, especially now as we're all trying to get involved. I mean, most of us are trying to get involved and do so much.
Right.
I want to remind people that you don't have to do it all, that it's okay to hit pause. And if you're at a place of overwhelm or burnout, that's the only thing to do, right? It's not going to fix itself at that point. So even if it's just for a few hours or even an hour, I know some people have caregiving responsibilities, parenting responsibilities, there's things that get in the way, but really just finding any type of space to pause and take out the stimulation. So especially for HSPs, like get into a dark room, take down the sensory input, the lights, the noise, and let your nervous system relax a bit. That's going to be essential. Just moving out of that doing mode.
Mm-hmm. And do you find though for HSPs like that some, I'll just say me, like are obsessed with doing, and so it can be hard to pull into being even though we need it? Like, is that common for you?
It's so common.
Okay.
It's so common, especially because our nervous systems are so sensitive and impacted. I imagine you felt this way when you're in that overstimulated space. It's uncomfortable to stop. Ironically, hitting pause can be painful to sit with the discomfort of that, and that can get in the way of slowing down. There's this buzziness that happens.
Totally. And you know what I think is so interesting about that and what you're saying is with the pandemic, I mean, so much slowdown happened, right? Like we couldn't leave our homes. I mean, in general. And it's like we definitely weren't traveling or, the things that pulled us out. I mean, we weren't even going to work, many of us, we were like working from home. So, that kind of being pulled in so many directions, it stopped. And I know it's been, different, like people who have kids at home or whatever, it's been quite chaotic. But for others, it's like it stopped, but we've had to really like be more in touch with ourselves, which I think is hard rather than running.
True. It's true. All those distractions have been removed for the most part. So if you're by yourself during quarantine, that's a lot. But also if you're quarantining with others, there's no respite from that engagement, that stimulation that you might be used to getting, whether it's even just driving to work or going to the store or whenever you get those little moments. So everything has been shifted, and it's a lot to sit with, especially if you haven't been regularly getting time for yourself. There's going to be a backlog of experiences to move through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because even if it's great people are saving time on their commute, but there was something about like getting up and not just going to your computer on your kitchen table, that signified work, right? It was like getting ready and then like, getting your coffee or whatever and going out the door and driving or walking or biking or busing, however you got to work. And it was just like that ability to like, okay, then I put on that hat, versus like all these different hats we're wearing at home constantly.
Right, and we're quickly jumping from one hat to the other. So you may immediately leave your children, go right to work, versus you had a buffer. And HSPs really, we need time to ease in. So a lot of HSPs, struggle to get out of bed in the morning, not because they're tired or they don't want to move into the day. They just need time. We move more slowly through the world. We have that pause button in our brains that says, hey, take a moment, think about what you're doing next, prepare for it. The phrase, the motto is do it once, do it right. That's our driving motto. So if you're just getting thrown into work or you're moving back and forth between roles, that's very overstimulating. It's hard for us.
Well, and that's a big thing, right? That they've been saying during the pandemic is people can't focus. And it's like, yeah, we can't focus because we don't have those buffers, as you mentioned. And also, we're in like this heightened alert sense of threat.
That's it too, right? Our nervous systems are already a bit activated, on alert, like, and which could throw us in a little bit of a survival mode depending on our circumstances.
Now, how do you encourage clients to create space for downtime, especially those who you mentioned, it's uncomfortable to actually stop or to pause or take that downtime?
It is. It really is. I mean, at at the core of it, I think there's a piece around needing to know that our needs are valid. I always used to say, the number one thing HSPs need is downtime. But then I realized, well, we're not ever going to take that downtime unless we understand why we need it. So that's really important, understanding why you need it and starting to look at what happens when you don't take it. And then finding the most comfortable way. So maybe it's not sitting on your meditation cushion, maybe it's going out for a walk with your dog, and that's the quiet time you get, something more active, or it's cooking a meal. Start where you are. You don't have to go from A to Z. Maybe you just start, with some movement, and then you move into more, quiet, still spaces for yourself. And just, but finding some way to unhook a bit.
And so, is this kind of how you encourage clients to create kind of a calm and nourishing practice, right? For some people, it could be a tea meditation. They make their tea, they sit with it, they walk their dog. I mean, how do you help people kind of figure out, okay, here is going to be my go-to when I need to slow down?
hmm Yeah, I think we could take those everyday activities and then bring just a little bit more intention. So let's say you're cooking. You could be cooking and then checking social media in between on your phone. What if you maybe took that one piece out and then you just focused on the cooking? That's a little bit easier than, say, sitting completely, in silence. So I would just say, trying to create a little bit of a scaffolding to get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like
it
one step
does.
at a time.
Yeah, yeah. And
It,
oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, because I wanna set clients up for success. Not throw them into the deep end of silence if that is feeling like too much to handle.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that versus like, okay, so every day take 10 minutes and sit on your meditation cushion. It's like, no, don't check social media when you're cooking, you
Right,
know?
or maybe take 1 minute to sit quietly as you drink your morning coffee or your morning tea, or maybe before you get out of bed, you just take 1 or 2 minutes just to lay there and look out the window. There can be little baby steps along the way, and knowing that it's a process to start to unwind the stimulation.
Yeah. Because we do live in like such a stimulating time, I mean, with regard to, say, social media and constant breaking news and, all these sorts of inputs that are coming in that it can be really hard to pull away.
It is hard. I mean, and people well, there's so much being coming at us. We're inundated with all this information, but then people expect you to be readily available. You know, now that we have text messaging and social media, direct messaging, and all these things, email. Everyone expects you to respond right away. So I always encourage my clients. I do this for myself. I keep my phone on do not disturb pretty much 99% of the time, unless I know I have a call coming in, and that way I'm opting in to engagement versus having it come into my day. And then letting people know, like for me as a therapist, I let my clients know that I'm only available during these times, and I encourage my clients to do that as well. Let family know you're not available after 8 p.m. unless it's an emergency, or you're not going to have your phone on you when you're going for a walk. Like I like to go for walks every night, and I leave my phone at home. Just starting to set some boundaries. That's another big piece around getting downtime, is creating some protection around that space for yourself.
Mm. And how do you encourage clients to start that or to figure out what sort of boundaries they might need? Because I think for many people, eating at a restaurant with their phone is normal, right? And so to begin to create these boundaries, they're going to be um I think hard to know, like, well, hard socially, right? Because if everyone else pulls out their phone, you're like, well, do I? Or, it's like, how do you encourage clients to like recognize where it would be helpful to set some boundaries?
That's a good question. I Yeah, I would start looking at what's causing stress. So, sometimes it's obvious, when a certain person texts you or calls you, it feels there's like a sense of dread or avoidance or, some, anxiety that might come up. So starting helping clients look at how do you feel when that person reaches out to you? And then how do you feel when they reach out to you maybe at a time when you've set aside for yourself? Because boundaries are so fluid. You're gonna have different boundaries with the same people, but at different times. So starting to look at those nuances, zooming in on like how are you feeling now versus here, and where are the hardships coming in, and then starting to make some changes. Because maybe you do want to have your phone out at dinner. That's okay. If that works for you, go for it. But if you're feeling distracted, if you're feeling resentful, if you're feeling anxious or overstimulated, then that may be a sign that, okay, this isn't working for you. So just starting to tune in and see what's the impact.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, what is the impact? Because for some people, carrying their phone, like I carry my phone when I go on walks because I want to get my steps.
For sure. Right.
Whereas, for other people, it might be like, oh my gosh, like I can leave my phone at home. I just never thought of that. So
It's very personal, and there's no one size fits all, and it's going to be different every day. Some days you're going on a walk and you just had so much contact that day and you don't want to risk your phone pinging, or and maybe you leave it at home, but other days you take it with you. Yeah, it just depends where you're at.
So, what do you wish you had known kind of sooner about being an HSP and helping HSPs? Because I think about, we're not like out of the womb, like, oh, we're an HSP. And so we need to be treated differently, or we need to treat ourselves differently. Like, when did you kind of like figure this out? And what do you wish you had known that could have been helpful? And how does that carry into your work? I know that's a lot of questions.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, if I could have known out of the womb, that would have been amazing. This all along. I mean, really, I wish I would have known about the trait sooner. So I don't know, I only have known about the trait maybe 7 or 8 years. And then it's been with me, throughout my whole clinical work. But just knowing about the trait itself would have been so helpful for me, because for so long I tried to change myself because I was moving through the world differently than most of the people around me, my family, my friends. I would get more excited about little things. I needed more time to make decisions. I didn't like surprises. I wanted more deep conversations with people. Um, and now I know myself so much more, and I can offer myself more self-compassion when I do need something different. It's easier to set boundaries. It's easier to take downtime. And because of knowing this, I there's so much more permission to create a life that works for me. I've created a practice, a work life that's so different than most of the other people in my profession. And I have a lot more fluidity and flexibility around like social engagements, things like that. So everything I do is easier knowing that I'm an HSP, and I have just a little bit of a different need.
Well, and I think too, it helps you recognize, like, I don't know, because otherwise we can feel just like, oh, why am I so different? Or why do I need this and other people don't? Why do I have to take Advil to get my hair colored?
Right. And just remember, even though you may not know a sensitive person, or it's most likely that you do. HSPs make up 20% of the population. It's just not as well known of a personality trait. It's only been, heavily researched in the last 20 years or so. So hopefully more people will start to know about it, and there's going to be more space for, acceptance of differences there.
Anything else you would like to share, kind of, April, about like your experience as an HSP or your work with HSPs?
Mm-hmm. I always love to finish off with just a reminder that there are a lot of strengths in the traits. Even though it doesn't always feel like it, even though the emotional part of the trait can kind of take the forefront, really, there's a lot of power in how our brain works, how perceptive we are, how creative we are, how intuitive we are. We're so empathetic. We have this sense of this capability of emotional leadership, which we really need right now in the world. And it impacts us in every area of our lives, from our own ability to be self-aware to what contributions we can make in our work and our relationships. We can create such a positive impact in the world. It's quite a gift that we can access when we start to take care of ourselves and learn more about ourselves. And I really want folks to take that message away with them.
And are there any favorite resources that you would encourage our listeners to check out?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the book. The number one starting place is starting with Dr. Aaron's book, The Highly Sensitive Person. It's also, she has a workbook, which can be really helpful for self-reflection. So if you're just learning about the trait, I would definitely suggest doing the workbook. It dives into different areas of life, like relationships and childhood experiences and just a lot of different areas. So it can be a great starting point for learning more about yourself. And then also, she has 2 documentaries out. And the newest one is, The Highly Sensitive Person, and then also Sensitive and in Love. So because a lot of times HSPs struggle in relationship, especially if they're with a non-HSP partner. So that can be a really great point of reflection.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for those. And listeners, I'll put those in the show notes. So the name of this podcast, April, my last question for you is Tranquility du Jour. And so I'm curious for you, as someone in the helping profession, as an HSP, as an introvert, how do you find tranquility in your everyday? I know you mentioned evening walks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this question. I don't know, there's so many ways to find tranquility. I mean, if I think of it on a bigger scale, I love being at the ocean. That has a lot of meaning for me, being in nature, practicing meditation, things that will help me kind of calm my nervous system and help me turn back inward. But there's so many little moments, throughout the day where I find myself slowing down and just pausing, sipping a cup of tea, or, I love just feeling the sunshine on my face for a moment. I don't know, it's just about finding intention in every moment and then choosing to welcome that in.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, April, for being with us and for the work you do in the world.
Thank you, Kimberly. It's been an honor to be on your podcast.
So in the show notes, again, at KimberlyWilson.com/494, you will find the HSP self-test, links to a variety of books that we mentioned, films we discussed, ways to embrace your strengths that April sent these resources over, such as the self-compassion exercises, the undervalued self, finding your true worth, overcome the struggle for more downtime, and access your sensitive strengths. And then also ways to follow April on social media, Instagram, Expansive Heart, and then Facebook, Expansive Heart Therapy. Now, we are 6 episodes away from episode 500, which I just can't believe. And it's funny, it'll be coming right around the time that the podcast started. I think it started September of 2005, and this will be August of that we have our 500th episode. So I'm really excited about this, and I want to make it a fun, festive event. So I welcome your input. What would you like to hear, see? I'm thinking, do we do something live? What topic would you like covered, etc. So would love to hear from you. Just drop me a note, hello@KimberlyWilson.com, and let me know what would make this meaningful and special to you. Also, in the show notes, you'll find a link to the TDJ Insiders Facebook group. It's a place to share resources, get inspiration. We've been reading White Fragility, make connections, and be part of the online book club, which again, I've started with the book White Fragility. So freaking good. So as a way to highlight Pride Month, I'm thinking Untamed by Glennon Doyle. So I just welcome your input too with regard to the 500th episode and maybe what would be a great next book for our online book club. And again, I hope you're reading along with White Fragility and finding it as enlightening as I am, and it seems as if other readers have been. For all the podcast episodes, all 493 before this one, you can find those at KimberlyWilson.com/podcast. And then there's also an iPhone and Android app. And be sure to subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast app. Maybe that's Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Overcast, and I have direct links to these. Now, a love note will be hitting inboxes on Tuesday. Would love to send one to you. So be sure to sign up at KimberlyWilson.com/love notes. And then this gets you invites, inspiration, and more on a weekly basis. There's also a link to my 6 books, ways to follow along on social media, and then a link to Tranquility, my locally sewn, eco-friendly fashion line. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's always a delight to be with you, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week ahead. Namaste.